On Hidden Voices family, and welcome to episode 11. I'm really excited about this episode because it's a conversation with a dear friend of mine, Sister Amila El Amin. The word that comes to mind when I think of Amila is sustenance. Not only because she provides that sustenance for our community, she has been feeding our indigent, poor, elderly, homeless folks for decades. And she actually has launched a program called Eating Rights. You will learn more about that program and be provided with the opportunity to support and make sure that folks have access to basic human need, the right to eat. And Sister Amila ensures that, and so we're grateful to her for the work that she does in community. I'm also grateful to her. Not everyone knows this, but she was one of the sisters who really was very supportive of my father when he was sick. She provided meals. She cooked his meals for him as I was when I traveled to Sacramento, and the only thing we agreed upon was I would buy the food and she would cook it for him. And he called her daughter, and she's my sister. So I have much love for her. I think that you'll learn a lot from her just about what it means to just the struggles that we go through and how we can overcome those struggles, and the compassion that we need to have for each other. So listen, learn, and amplify with us.
So I feel like we should make this connection to back to family, because you're talking also about Brother Tarek and his relationship to family, and we began with family, and then you also talked about and this particular situation where you're talking about someone who was a drunk driver killing Brother Tarek also is upsetting. And it also kind of makes me think in terms of like your father, and how we can also, because we began by talking about how we can't write someone off and they make mistakes, they still have the capacity, but here's someone who had his alcoholism actually ended a life. So I want to make sure that we name that just because you're not written off doesn't mean that you don't have responsibility, right?
Right.
So can you talk about like how to sort of like you and your family, and how you've kind of learned from like the experiences? You mentioned a bit about like your father, but how that has sort of your family has helped you and guided you.
Hmm. So, so Islamically, intoxicants, there are some gains in it, but the harm is worse than the business, the benefit. And that's a Quranic verse, and that's a verse in the Quran that speaks about, it's actually speaking about intoxicants and gambling and together. But so yeah. So I never was a drinker, probably because I didn't like the smell of it. And, my father was an alcoholic, that smell was just something that, I never, you know, my father included, most people that I knew that drank, they lost the ability to be in control. And so that was never something that was very inviting to me. The idea of not being in control of myself, or being so intoxicated that, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So I cannot tell a lie. You know what I mean? I did indulge in an intoxicant
Yes.
that is now legal today. Um, and, and now they just saying what we were saying back in the day. It was legal then because it was natural. And it was created by God, just like tea. And so, even as a Muslim, even being born a Muslim, I had my my run with marijuana, and it ended with my daughter becoming pregnant, and wanting to be the best person that I could be for my daughter.
Yeah, yeah. So you did talk a bit about you at the very beginning. You talked about being a mother, but can you talk about your role, the role you play in the family, and like talk about your family a little bit more?
So and you might have to edit this out, but what's interesting is after our conversation yesterday, right?
Yeah.
And listening to your mom's interview, and listening to that, thinking, how wonderful it is for people who have gone through the transatlantic slave trade and the just what we've gone through in this country, to have beautiful stories about their childhood, and and for her to mention her great grandmother who had 9 kids with slaveholder, and got land, and there's family land out of that, and but there wasn't this, it wasn't from a place where she couldn't talk about it, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And I don't know if I think that we talked about the fact that we didn't get to have no conversations with my grandmother about her childhood. Yeah. And so yesterday, when I went to visit Sister Akia, we ended up having a conversation that started off talking about the podcast and your mother's interview, and then went into my feelings of, and we were also talking about your marriage, and knowing, the fact that that you met young, you know what I mean, that you met this quality brother, and that he is still a quality brother to this day, that he is the bonus dad to your daughter, you know what I mean, but yet, they have a very wholesome relationship, and that for my grandmother, who the product of was abused by her stepfather, you know what I mean, that's not the every story of the Black family that came through that, you know what I mean. And so, and the fact that you guys are still together, and that that you came to Examen. So we were having this conversation, right, about unhidden voices and all this stuff, and so I was talking to to Akia, and something came to me about my great grandmother that I knew, but that I tied to this family that we didn't know until after my grandmother passed away in 2006. Like, we know nothing about these people for the most part, but there was some other abuse that happened that it hit me that it was the father of this time, just all this stuff. So I called my mom.
Yeah.
To verify that, because I'm talking to Akia, and then I'm like, wait a minute. So that means, so I call my mom to say, Mommy, so that means, and my mom is all emotional already. And I'm like, what's going on? And she's telling me that she had been writing about my grandmother and my aunt for about the last hour. So while I was having this conversation about Sister Akia about my grandmother and all of this, my mother was processing some emotions about writing about my grandmother and my auntie and that process. And it blew my mind. And then talking to my mom about how I had this conversation with you earlier, and just how God is letting us know that this storytelling is important, and that this history is important, and that, like we were talking about, like, there's so many angles to the Black experience, and they all weren't horrific, but they all weren't hunkadory either. You know what I mean? And that the trauma that we are carrying around. And then I went to this, I'm in Tiburon because of this march that they're having in Tiburon, where we're of the 100 people or 150 people that were there, we are the we are the majority of the 10 Black people that are there. Wow. You know, and they did this exercise where the coordinator of this march and this rally did this exercise, and he had everybody lay on the ground. And he set a timer for 8 minutes and 49 seconds. 46 seconds. And then he talked about the uncomfortableness of it. And he talked about how long. And so I felt like, I'm a Black woman, I ain't got to lay down. Like, you got me to a sit. Like, I didn't lay down. You know, like, I'm not about to present. And you know what I mean? And physically, it just wasn't something I was about to do. Like, I wasn't about to lay down on the ground in Tiburon, you know, to experience what it's like to be a Black man. That wasn't about to be my life. but sitting there and thinking about it, before we were halfway over, I was boo-hooing. And I said to the person with the bullhorn, and we are not even halfway through.
Wow.
And then he repeated what I said. We're only halfway through the 8 minutes that he endured.
Yes.
And how uncomfortable are you at 4 minutes?
Yeah.
You know, and then he started saying, I can't breathe, and having the people repeat it. And so we're in the middle of Tiburon, and there's like 150 white people laying on the ground with their hands behind their back.
Oh my God.
And being talked to by this coordinator. And then he started saying, mama, girl, you know, I was crying about Shirley Temple a minute ago, so you about could imagine what I was doing in downtown Tiburon. And so again, so just that, you know, just this, like, this is the time for us to really dig down deep into the fuel of what drove that fueled the civil rights movement and fueled all these other movements to initiate and push for change. You know what I mean? And like, that stuff is still real. You know what I mean? We're talking about your great grandmama who had 9 children by the slaveholder. We're talking about my great great grandmother who was beat by her stepfather, and then like all of this trauma that comes to and it didn't even like come to you know, it didn't like erupt at George Floyd, because there's been how many killings since he died? You know what I mean? So like, why it is so important that we have these hard conversations with ourselves, with our own family, let alone with white people. You know what I mean? Like we gotta realize that dysfunction created another dysfunction, that got young men walking around with their booty out, thinking that that's in some way manly. You know what I mean? And I'm like, dude, that is just a sexual exploitation for the dang on perverted system that used to sodomize our men.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like that give $1 million contracts to entertainers to walk around with their pants down.
Yeah.
You know, like it's so much, it's like this dysfunction, this systematic racism, this systematic perversion, this systematic demonic behavior is so deep and has trickled into our communities and has created this self-loathing, and you know what I mean, this just it's just deeper than, and so I don't know how far off of the track I am right now, because I feel like I derailed.
You're not off the track. I think what you're saying it speaks to the importance of having the conversations. And I feel like what has happened is that we have, getting back to what Babalawo said about the complexity of the trauma that we're experiencing. And it is something that has passed on through our generations. And one of the ways, the only way that we are going to be able to heal it is through the collectivity, right? The collective healing. And that means in order to do that, we need to have those hard conversations with our mothers, with our, so like one of the things I told my son, I said, to be perfectly honest, and I only curse when I'm mad and then also when I'm being honest. So I'm about to say a cuss word because I'm about to be honest. But I say, I was being really chicken shit when I was doing the other interviews because I asked everybody, how do you want to be remembered? Because I wanted to be able to ask my mother that. And I was afraid to ask her that. So I had to fold that into the question. So I'm asking like 15-year-olds, how do you want to be remembered? And so as I was editing my nephew's video, which I'm working on, he's going to be episode 3. I realized, like, I asked him how he wants to be remembered, and he's 15. And I was going to edit it out. Because of the fact that I don't want to put that in the universe. I don't want to put that out there, right? And it's one of the things that we fear, for our children, and we cannot protect them other than to have these conversations to let them know that, they don't have to hold that fear that we have. And so one of the things I feel so grateful for is the capacity to learn from and listen to and hear, and to open up, like, and the reason why I picked Unhidden Voices was because of Hidden Figures.
Yes.
And I was like, I'm tired of this. Why do we always gotta be hidden? You know what I mean? Like, we gotta be unhidden. We gotta take that veil off. We have to share our experiences. It shouldn't be like we wait till somebody's 90 years old or they pass away to learn anything about their life. It's crazy, right? And so,
but I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. No, go ahead.
But the reality of it is that, and there's some things like, and we talked about this yesterday, like, we have to be careful, and we can't be selfish in our pursuit, because like the stuff that I learned about my grandmother, she couldn't handle me learning about while she was alive.
Right.
You know what I mean? My grandmother died at 83, and all the stuff that I know, I learned after most of it, I learned after she was gone. Yeah. She couldn't handle that conversation. Yeah. She couldn't have that conversation. She didn't have. My grandmother has a daughter who was the product of her stepfather. And she never had that conversation with my aunt. My aunt, we don't know if my grandmother knows or knew that my aunt knew who her father was.
Oh, okay.
Because that conversation never happened.
Yeah.
My grandmother left Alabama and only went back to visit a few times that you could count on my 2 hands.
Yeah.
Like, so it's like, you're right. Like, these conversations have to happen, but some of those conversations are not going to happen with the people who experience them, because the trauma might send them over the edge, as we spoke about yesterday.
And I am this is where, like, we need Babalawo, we need therapists, we need people in our community that have that expertise to help us, right? And so, because I'm not a therapist. I don't know. I do know that it comes out even if you don't, like, you're not having that conversation, but you're having that conversation because you're living that every single day of your life. It's in everything you do, the choices you make. The rebellion you talked about earlier was a reflection of a rebellion against, like, the mistreatment that was in your bloodstream because of your grandmother and your mother and all these things. This is coming out. It's gonna come out. You know what I mean?
Right.
And it's coming
Right.
because of her response to the food. That was a response to, like, no, I can't allow somebody who has mistreated me in my life at all. So that shut off was a conversation. You know what I mean? So it's in everything. And if we have to have a way to collectively heal. And because otherwise, that's the only way we survive, right? Because we can survive with the trauma, but we can't, for our children, we need to be able to heal from it, right? So that they, and that's that's the biggest thing I'm learning, right? Is that, like, I've been talking to my kids about Arizona because like about maybe 7 years ago, I took them and we went to the Grand Canyon, and I arranged this family vacation in Grand Canyon, right? I'm afraid of heights, but I was like, oh yeah, let's go to Grand Canyon. And then we go there, and then my terror, like, I'm messing up their trip, right? Because, like, I'm just like, I don't want them to do anything. I'm so nervous about them. And it actually got to, like, they wanted to go down into the canyon. I wouldn't let them because I was afraid. And I'm walking along, like, we're spiraling down into the canyon, and I literally have a panic attack, and I freeze, and I cannot move. Like, I'm frozen, paralyzed. And Tarek has to come and get me. And everybody else is like running, jumping, like, and I recognize, I was like, there's no railing. There's no protection. I'm just here on the side of this mountain, crawling down. You know what I mean? Like, I was like, can I crawl on
Girl,
my...
you did better than me, because I would have got back in the car and told them, I'll see y'all, and if you die, I love you.
And I was like, and so, like, he sat with me and he kind of talked me, like, literally talked me down off the
Talk
ledge,
you off the ledge.
literally, and got me to safety, right? And so we were talking, and the kids were saying, and I was saying, in all these conversations, and when I'm talking to everybody about, like, the most fun we have had as a family, they're like, oh, Grand Canyon, oh, let's go back. And I'm like, and I said, well, now that everybody's an adult, right, then I could maybe go back without the fear, but only way I would be able to do that is to own and acknowledge the reason why I had that fear, and that I can't control this, right? Like, I can't do it. So I need to be able to acknowledge it and say, like, what is also in those kids is the fight, like, you know what I mean? And so we have the fear, but we also have the fight, and we have ingrained that in them. And one of the things that I think is so beautiful is, like, when my kids were, speaking up, the protests, and they're speaking up, and they had their fists up in the sky, and they're like yelling at the police. And I'm like, my kids are yelling at the police. And she said, you taught them to yell at the police. You taught them that. Like, this is what we taught them. And I'm like, oh yeah, that's right. Right. So I can't be bad. I can't be afraid. I cannot. So we have to heal. We have to have these conversations. And so I think it's beautiful that you had that conversation with your mother. I think it's beautiful that she's writing it down, because that's the first step in processing something like this. I do.
Oh, yeah, let me show you this. It is her second writing, because last year, when did she publish? I think it was in, like, December.
Mhm.
maybe before, but she published her first book,
What?
and it's called Your Incredible Mind: How to Reprogram Your Subconscious Mind to Live Your Best Life at Any Age.
Go ahead on. Okay, where can we get the book?
You can get it off Amazon if you want.
Yeah.
Um, and so the book that what she was writing last night was actually the story for her sister. But this is a story of my mom's life and a little bit of what she experienced with my grandma's life. She didn't get really super detailed, but it talks about some of the things that she went through as a child and her self-esteem and, you know, who she thought she could or could not be. And so that's that one. And so the book, so what she's writing down now is the story of my aunt and her experience, because she feels like it would be very healing for my aunt, because my aunt is still walking around with a lot of pain. Yeah. And so when I got your email that's flashed across my screen, we were securing our flights because in October we're going to Georgia and then renting either vans or RVs to drive to Mobile, Alabama, to take my aunt to, I can't remember what the name of it is, some other place in Alabama where she was born, because she's never been back to the place where she was born. The last time she was there, she was 6 months.
Wow.
And so my mom is planning this trip. So when I was talking to her yesterday after talking to Akia, she told me that's what she was doing, and I was like, okay, count me in. And so she wasn't playing; she was counting. She done found us round trip tickets to Georgia, to from California to Georgia and back for $243. And so we got our tickets booked, and so anyway, and we're gonna go to the county records and, you know, see what other stuff we can find out. But this particular journey is about my aunt. Yeah. And my mom really wanting to write my aunt's story and really help my aunt heal, you know, through the telling of the story and the looking at the things that didn't have anything to do with her, you know, and realizing, you know, like, you know, for my aunt, like, we think about the trauma that my grandmother went through, but the trauma that my aunt went through as a child of that trauma, and then, like I said, the revelation that came to me while I was talking to Akia, that I was like, wait a minute, oh my God, had to do with my grandmother's grandmother and her husband, and the trauma that my grandmother experienced in the womb of her mother. You know what I mean? So it was like, and who, at the hands of who that trauma came, you know what I'm saying? Which was, as we grow up, the father figure who's supposed to be protectors and maintainers, they're beating you half to death, or they're sleeping with you like you their wife, or, you know what I mean? Like, all of this dysfunction, and it does not excuse, you know, like, to say they were descendants of enslaved people doesn't excuse their behavior, but it talks about where some of that behavior come from. You know what I mean? And that perversion, that sexual perversion that runs rampant. You know what I mean? And where your first sexual stimuli came from. You know what I'm saying? And even if it was a dysfunctional stimuli, if it was stimuli nonetheless, it is your first experience. You know what I mean? And you have to work consciously to uproot and upheaval that experience, because if you don't, it will haunt you, and you will have some whacked out, perverted appetites that you don't even know where they came from,
Yeah.
because they're not natural, you know what I'm saying? But they were developed and they were cultivated over time through this dysfunctional abuse that now hurt people, hurt people, hurt people, hurt people, hurt people, hurt people. You know what I mean? And you got generations of hurt people hurting people. And again, that don't get you off, you know what I mean? And your tail may still burn in hell, you know what I mean? But we cannot negate where it came from. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. And I think that part, I think that's the hardest part, you know, because it also speaks to, you know, like I had a conversation with some good friends of mine, and we were talking about, like, we were talking specifically about forgiveness. And I, you know, I struggle with that as a like, you know, theoretically I get it or whatever. But you know, like, especially like the people that have harmed me the worst, you know. And so one of, you know, even talking about my own abuse, my own sexual abuse, and, you know, being able to acknowledge that and say, you know, because my thought would be to just try and erase that as a memory, you know what I mean? But again, like when we were talking about, like, you know, the trauma is still there, you know, still there. Like you know, you cannot, it always
Can't escape it, right? You have to process it.
You have to process it. And so, so what I learned was from my friends was that real forgiveness is letting go of, like, the accepting that you can't change it. Like, you wish you could make somebody have made a different decision, but you can't. Like, you can't change what they did. You can't make them do something that you want them to do, because that's the choice they made. As wrong as it is, as corrupt as it is, as painful, as perverted, as harmful as it was, that's what they did. And you can't change them you can't change that action. You can't make them do it. So that is just an acceptance piece, right? Which I think is getting to what you're talking about, and sort of like acknowledging the harm is not saying like that it's okay. You know, it's just saying this happened. There's a reason for it, you know, and not even trying to, you know, and again, like, we're not psychiatrists. We're not therapists.
Right.
That's not my job to try and psychoanalyze why somebody abused, you know, someone else. But it is to say, like, in terms of my own healing process, is to kind of say, like, okay, like, I can't change the fact that happened, but I'm not in that place, right? Like, I'm able to kind of look at my life and say, what do I want? You know, because one of the things that happened when my girls were in middle school was that their teacher ended up being brought up on charges for sexually abusing a student. So he was arrested, and then, like, we end up having like this family meeting at Barney's, right? And the kids all know about it and stuff, and I am literally reliving my own trauma, you know, by hearing this. And I'm starting to panic, because I'm thinking, like, my girls, you know, like, so my whole time trying to protect them from this, and then this happens, and I don't know what, you know. And so and it was a moment, and I'll never forget, I was sitting there and I looked at everybody else at the table, and everybody else is just eating their kosher hot dogs and fries, and, you know, just like, ignore everybody else's pride. And I'm the one, and I was like, I am losing it, and they're all fine. And I need to get, like, we are not, you know, my kids are okay. You know what I mean? Like, I had to talk myself off the ledge, and recognize that the trauma that I had isn't their trauma. Like, they're not, you know, they didn't experience what I experienced, and I can't put that on them. So that's another reason why we have to have these we have to heal collectively, right? And we have to acknowledge what we've experienced so that we can move on, and we can't have to accept, like, we can't change it, but it doesn't have to define who we are in the future. So,
That's
okay.
right.
So this is the last question I'm going to ask you, which is, so what do you want everybody to know about what it means to be Black, part of a Black American family?
That there are different shades of Black.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not going to say brown, I'm going to say Black.
Yeah.
Because never are we called brown Americans.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to say that there's different shades of Black, and Black does crack. You know what I'm saying? You know, and we need to recognize that. You know what I mean? Yes, it's beautiful. Yes, that melanin makes us look like we 15 when we 51 if we take really good care of ourselves and all of that. But Black does crack. And as Black women, we have to understand that, because we are bred, and I'm going to say it just like that, we are bred in a way to believe that cracks and all, we got to keep going, and that we don't have time to be stopping and filling in the cracks, and you know what I mean? Like, we got to just keep moving, and if we can get some self-care in, good, but like I was talking about eating rights, like, eating is not a luxury, and neither is self-care. It's a necessity, and I'm saying that to myself first, because my voice is closest to me, you know what I mean? And I struggle with that. Like, I struggle with that in weight, in eating, and you know what I mean? And just believing in myself, and believing, as passionate as I am about eating rights, and as passionate as I am about the right that people have to eat, with that same amount of intensity, I'm afraid that I'm not capable of doing that. And I doubt that I can actually manifest something that big and that powerful and that needed in a community as a Black woman who doesn't have a secular degree, you know what I mean? And so, and for people who know me and think Sister Amila's so strong, and Sister Amila's she's just so this, and she just keeps going, and no matter what, like, to know that Black does crack, you know what I mean? And that it takes us as a community to hold each other together, so when we are cracking, you know what I mean, that we don't just fall apart, you know what I mean, and end up off the ledge, you know what I'm saying? And being able to recognize, as you said, like, your cracks, because being violated is a crack, and it does, like, whenever I think about the violation that happened to me inside of my Muslim community, one of the things that I know is that it made me the mother that I was. Like you was gonna have to work real hard to get your hands on my daughters. You know what I mean? Like, you was gonna have to be getting up before tahajjud. You know what I'm saying? Because I'm gonna get up for tahajjud. So if you creeping around, you know what I mean, I'm gonna hear you. You know what I mean? So to speak, like, we were talking about the conversation that I had with my oldest daughter when I married my ex-husband, in front of my stepfather, who was her grandfather. Like, we're having a family meeting one time, and I said to my 6-year-old daughter, nobody has a right to put their hands on you. Nobody. And that includes your grandpa, that includes your bonus dad, that includes your uncles, that includes everybody. And this is a conversation. I'm having this conversation with my 6-year-old in front of the men folk in my family, you know, at the time, who was present. And I said, and if they come to you with that story, that if you tell me they'll kill us,
Yeah.
I want you to know if you tell me, I will kill them, and I won't even let them know why they're dying.
Mm.
Because I wanted her to know that you don't, because that's what happens. You know what I mean? If you tell this or if you tell that. And in front of those men, I said, if they put their hands on you and you tell me, I promise you I will kill them, and I won't even tell them why.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you don't even have to worry about it. Because if they live, they won't even know why I tried to kill them, because I ain't even gonna tell them.
Yeah.
Like, I ain't even gonna be like, you put your hands up, like, you ain't gotta worry. But, and my ex-husband, he was livid. He was livid. He was livid because he took it personal, as if I was saying I thought he might do something to my daughter. And I looked him in his face and I told him, the truth of the matter is, you don't know you can't trust the person until you know you can't trust the person. So I don't give a dang on how you felt. This was not about you. This was, and if you don't understand, like, if you can't go inside of yourself and understand me as a mother who was violated as a child by somebody that my mama trusted, if you can't get that, that's your problem. Figure it out. And we weren't saying figure out your life back then, but that's about what was the equivalent of what I told you. Figure your life out, bruh, because that ain't none of my business. My daughter needs to know that that's not okay, that her whole body is her private. That was the other thing I told her. Your whole body is your body part, your private part. From the ends of your hair to the tips of your toenails, all of that is private.
Yes.
Nobody has a right to touch none of it without your permission, you know? And so, and that was a hard conversation. Like you said, you're going to cuss, I'm going to say vagina. Like, like I didn't, when I talked to my daughters about their bodies, we didn't go, you're this or you're, you know, all these little cute names that people give to the whatever they call it, right? She had a vagina and she had a butt. And so if somebody, you weren't gonna say, well, no, if it was your vagina, you know what I mean? And so literally there was some children one time in the Islamic community who had been exposed to some stuff. And I was watching these children and right under my nose, they're playing, like right there. And one of the children or a couple of the children was inviting my daughter to play an inappropriate game. And the reason I knew was because my daughter, who was probably 3 or 4, said, you want to play the vagina game? and though I can laugh about that right now, it set my antennas up. I knew, and so I called, you know, I brought the children, you know, I talked to the children. I didn't get upset because I didn't want to traumatize them, and you know what I mean? And so I just asked, like, what's the vagina game? And this and blah, 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 and and then these other children kind of told me that it was something they played with their cousins, and you know what I mean? You know, like, and so, like, now you could just about imagine me 20-something years ago, like, wanting to scream at the top of my lungs, wanting to choke out these kids who had just exposed my child to something that wasn't, but I knew that wouldn't work, you know. But again, it was because of the language that me and my children use, you know, about their bodies that quickly alerted me that something inappropriate was happening, right? And that there was an inappropriate conversation taking place, you know. And even though the other children was referring to her body part as something else, what she said was, so you want to play the vagina game? and which for me, again, it's like it speaks to the importance of real conversation
Yeah.
and not feeling like, because people used to ask me, like my daughters would say my vagina itch, like in the middle of a family. and and people would be like, oh my God, she just said vagina.
Mm.
And I'd be like, yep, that's what it is. Like, you know,
Yeah. Yeah. Now, I think,
you know, go ahead.
no, finish.
But just basically like we have these taboo topics, or how
Right.
you're supposed to say it, what's appropriate, and what we shouldn't say. Breast, the same thing I used to say about to my babies, like, you want some breast milk? I didn't go, you want some ninny, or you want some da-da-da-da? It was breast milk. And that's what we called it. and I mean, I used to even make songs with them, and I would go, the breast milk truck is coming, the breast milk, from the Eddie Murphy's, the ice cream truck is coming, the ice cream man. You know, like that was the language that I used with them, because it was breast milk. It wasn't ninny jugs. I mean, what's the difference between calling it a ninny jug and a breast milk? Like, why is ninny jug so acceptable? You know what I mean? But breast milk ain't. You know, like, so I never dealt with them. So again, what would I like for people to know or to think about Black families? Like we are unique beyond any kind of, like, we are the African American Black, whatever it is, the label that you use or choose, the more, whatever you want to be, like, you know, Hebrew, whatever, children of Moses, call yourself whatever you want. The reality of it is that we are unique.
Yeah.
We are unique on so many levels. But in that uniqueness is a sister called it yesterday, is a cemetery.
Mm-hmm.
We are walking around with cemeteries in us, you know, and those bodies in those cemeteries have stories and have trauma that has been passed down to us. And some of it is very healthy and some of it is very dysfunctional, you know. And so that, know this about me as a Black woman and know this about my community. We are traumatized.
Yeah.
And there are cracks in our Black.
Yeah.
But that doesn't make us any less than. It doesn't make us any less worthy. It doesn't make us any less qualified. You know what I mean? And that we as a community have to remember that we were bred to keep our, as your daddy would say, hold our backs up straight and our heads held high, no matter what.
Yeah.
And we have to remember that for each other, that's just knee-jerk reaction. How are you doing? Alhamdulillah, very well.
Yeah.
That's the knee-jerk. What am I going to tell you, girl? So now, okay, so like Babala was said, do you really want to know how I'm doing? Or would you like for me to just say, Alhamdulillah, I'm very well? Yeah. Because this morning, how I was doing, and last night, how I was doing, wasn't good. Like, I said in a protest that had people lay down on their stomachs.
Yeah.
To remember one of my brothers that looked like Kunta Kinte. He don't look half Black. He got the wide nose Black. He got the wide lips Black. He got the broad Kunta Kinte, I ain't Toby look.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? And that experience, I don't know what the white people experienced while they were laying on that ground. But what this Black woman experienced was, that could have been my brother.
Yeah.
That could have been my nephew. Why don't you care enough to not sit on somebody's neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds? That's hella long, man.
Yeah, it is.
You know, that's not, I accidentally snuffed you out because I put the bag over your head and we was playing the game and I didn't realize that you couldn't breathe.
Yeah.
You crying out, I can't breathe, and the people who are your coworkers don't move, and there are people on the sidelines begging you.
Yeah.
I ain't never seen the video. Amina, I have yet to see that video, but I know this from what other people have told me about their experience with watching the different videos, that there are people begging this officer to get up off of him.
Mm-hmm.
And he didn't move.
No.
So to think that we're not broken in a system but to think that Black don't crack under a system such as that is whack. You know, there's your poem. and I dropped the mic, and we're done. No. But you know, like, subhanallah.
Okay. Okay. Oh my God. Okay, so I'm looking at this, and we're gonna have to do yours in the 2-part because just because I feel like I want to make sure everybody listens, and there's a lot there. But I also, and I'm gonna stop the video. I'm gonna stop the video after I say this because I feel compelled to say to you that that what you expressed in terms of the doubt of like your ability to accomplish, you know, everything you want to do as far as the eating rights campaign is something that you recognize the difference between the abundance, right, that Allah has, because this is blessed. Like, this whole thing is blessed. The fact that we're able to have this conversation, the fact that we're building a platform for this, the fact that you're doing this work and that it's supported, the fact that people are going to listen and they're going to be compelled to support, right? And that's a blessing. That's from abundance. That's from Allah, 100%. The doubt is shaitan, right? That is what that is. Because, yeah, you have the capacity. It's in you. It's been ingrained in you since the very early on. It's something that is a part of you, of who you are as a human being. And it's connected to your soul. So it's your life's work. So there's abundance in that. There's blessing in that. There's capacity in that. That's a beautiful thing. You know, don't ever doubt it. Right? You don't have to have, like your dad fed people and he was homeless. So I learned today that anybody can feed people, but who will do it is not the same, right? Because there's only a few people that have that commitment and that love and that capacity to do it. And when you told me a few weeks ago, when I was writing and you commented and you said, like, because I have met Brother Tariq and I worked with him, and I was actually his connection for Abraham Day in our community, because I was like the vice principal of the school, and I was all these things, and Allah moved me out of the way because he knew that was your job, right? That he knew that you were supposed to be doing that job and I was supposed to be doing this job. Okay? So I recognized that as soon as you told me that story, I said, oh my God, because there's no way that 13 years of feeding people and then to make a commitment to say, not only am I not going to just make sure you eat once a week, I'm going to work to ensure that you eat every single day and that you know where your food is coming from. That's a blessed effort. Inshallah. That's a blessed effort. So no doubt. Okay. I feel like I should start rapping. I should rap. I should write the poem.
And we know you got it in you. Why you playing? I've heard your poem.
But yeah, so I want you to know that. I want you to recognize that. I feel like everybody who's listening and tuning in, you can support the effort by going to mueed.org.
mueedinc.org. www.mueed.org. DINC.org.
And I will put the link to that in the explanation of your like the article, the cover article that goes with this, and also in the explanation of this episode, so that people can just click on it easily when they read the synopsis of this episode. And thank you so much, sister. Thank you for talking to me.
Alhamdulillah. Thank you for having me. It was such an honor. Thank you for sending the email along with the text, because I was so not looking at my phone.
My pleasure. I love you.
And let me say this to you. Thank you for following. Like you said, this is your work. Thank you for stepping into your work and knowing that our voices deserve not to be hidden, and creating a platform for us to be able to lift our voices as not only as Black women, but as Black Muslim women, you know what I mean? And every other Black voice, male or female, that comes through this platform, you know, for finding us worthy, because it wasn't your voice that you did this to uplift. It was the voices of your people. And so I just want to say thank you for that, and may you be rewarded.
I mean, thank you. I love you.
I love you too, sweetie. Walaikum assalam.